All right, so I'm gonna be bending the sides for some F Style and modified F Style mandolins. So I've gone ahead and done a bunch of the prep work, have the heating iron nice and hot. You can see the steam coming off. That's how I know that's hot. I also have it on the highest setting. That also helps. But I have the maple, it's milled down. The rims on my mandolins, I do 1 3/8 of an inch, and then I thin it down to about like 90 thousandths, 85 thousandths, and I find that's pretty good. It can vary depending on the grain of the wood you're bending and how much figure, whether it's walnut, maple, cherry, oak. So the thicknesses might vary, but generally 85 thousandths to 90 thousandths. Before I bend the piece, I always draw like a check mark or like a little arrow along the length. And that just kind of keeps me oriented as far as what I intend for the bottom of it to be. It's easy when you're kind of mixing and flipping, and it's easy to get all mixed up. So use a little reference mark, and that can help avoid some confusion while you're in the middle of bending stuff and where it goes. So I have a bunch of pieces over there I'm going to be using. I have a mold that when I bend it, I'll clamp it into and let it dry, and also use this as kind of a backing caul for applying pressure once I have the initial bends, and I will allow it to create the steam to kind of lock in that bend, and then I'll clamp it too. But when I first start bending the piece of wood, I use this spring steel. And so equipment that I use is bending iron. I mainly use this one on really tight radiuses for custom builds or even for the scroll. I also have some lengths of copper pipe that I'll use, like 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, and I'll clamp those in and then use like a blowtorch and use that as a bending thing. So whatever radius you need, I find copper is a good material. And then just a spray bottle. I think in the past, sometimes I'll just use a bucket of water, dip the wood in, whatever works. So I'm gonna do my best to show what I'm doing. So for an F Style mandolin or modified F Style, I'll just pick the side I want and I'll just spray. As you can see, it's just half of the board, half the piece of wood. I won't worry about this right now. That's just gonna be the bend later on, but that's just basically spritzed with water. I've tried soaking it in like boiling water or doing the steam box. I find this is the best or least dramatic of methods. So I just use a spring steel, put it behind. And I think I've mentioned before, but basically what's happening is you're creating steam, and the steam is going to help loosen and make the wood fiber and the cells of the wood more pliable and bending. So it takes, just like when you exercise, it takes a little bit of time to get warmed up. Same thing when you're bending wood, like it's gonna need some time to like loosen up and realize what's going on, and it'll get more flexible as you go. So when you first start, take your time and pay attention to how the wood feels and if it's giving or not. And yeah, don't force it. If you hear a snap, that means you probably forced it. So also a good reason to have extra pieces milled down. So what I will do, try not to hit the camera. Kind of hear the steam. So have a plan in your mind of how you want to approach the flow of how you're going to be bending the wood. And I think it's always good. Just really try to visualize what you're doing. Take your time, try to visualize it. Just be patient. So when you first start bending the wood, you'll hear kind of a sizzle and you'll see some steam, and then the wood's going to dry out, and you can see that's dried out. you definitely want to keep spritzing it with water, and just kind of keep that momentum of creating the steam. If you just kept it on the heating iron without reapplying water, then you're just going to burn the wood and it's going to become super brittle because basically the wood's dehydrated and it'll just most likely snap. So unless that's your goal, then all right, it's getting. Sometimes if it's a full scroll on a mandolin, I'll actually bend the scroll part in several stages. And this being the first stage, the last stage would be I would use a tighter radius pipe, like one of the copper pipes I have, just to get more of a tighter curl. But so far you can kind of see what's, I don't know if you can see the steam coming off of it. Anyway, but just for me blabbering these past minute, that's kind of what it's doing. So like I said, you want to apply more water. And you just kind of want to keep building off of that momentum, you know, everything's just kind of all about momentum. And once the wood fibers start to loosen, rock it back and forth. And I'm just feeling for give of the wood fibers, especially at the tighter radius. You don't want to rush that. Different pieces of wood take a little bit of different finessing. Maple can be a little bit tricky just because the figure, assuming it's figured maple. If you do snap a piece, no big deal, because there are a lot of other parts on an F Style mandolin that have smaller bent tight radiuses, so you can just use it for that. So that's another reason I'll always start with the scroll part, is because if you're using a piece this long and you snap it here, well, you can use that for, you know, there's several other areas on it. So but that's kind of how it's progressed so far. I think in hindsight, I would have thinned this maple a little bit more, but it's okay. I'll do my best. I'm trying to just kind of keep nice even pressure kind of dispersed. You know those bugs, the water striders or whatever, they just have like nice even pressure. Not that this is anything like that. Let's see if I can get around this. But as far as how I'm applying the pressure to the spring steel, I'm not concentrating it on one spot. I'm just kind of all right, so as you can see, the wood is bent and it's actually now hitting my right hand. So what I'll do is I'll actually hold the wood like that for a few seconds and kind of let all the moisture turn into steam and kind of lock in that bend. And started raining. Should be weird with the sun. So you can see, got a nice initial scroll there. So now I'll just use my hands and just kind of press in again. And something I'll also do, I don't see it handy, but sometimes I'll just use a piece of scrap wood to also apply some pressure. All right, so that'll be the initial bend. Again, I'll take it to a pipe later, but you can see, you know, it fits in this really well. We got really lucky this time. And then I'll just use this to really press firmly. Now, once I put it into this mold, I'm gonna first I'm gonna burn my finger, and then I'm gonna hold that, and I'll get a pencil, and I will mark right where that little straightaway ends and starts to become this curve. All right, and that's gonna be kind of my reference point of when I bend this part right here. So line is drawn, spray it with water. For this, it's not like a crazy bend, so you don't, if you're feeling comfortable in your skills, like you don't necessarily need backing for it, but it's probably good practice to just use it anyway. But sometimes you can get away with just using your hands and bending it. I'm just gonna put another mark right here. And again, think about what you're doing. Take your time. The good thing about using like the spring steel, which I guess I should use it if I'm talking about why it's so great, it kind of traps in that steam and prevents it from escaping, so it kind of creates a nice little microclimate. Still want to be careful. I don't want to like jinx myself. Again, I'm just waiting for the wood fibers to relax, ease up. Add some more water. Some heating irons, I believe they come with like an attachment at the top with like a tighter radius. So I guess that'd be pretty cool. But so yeah, you might not need to use the pipe method that I was talking about earlier if you've got one of those. And if you don't have one of those, you can use the pipe method. When you're kind of standing above the heating iron like this, like your face will get so dry. So maybe have some face moisturizer handy. All right, let's see. So you can see that there's the bend there. So what I'm now going to do is kind of flex that more down, and then we're going to be bending that curve up. So I'm going to do that a little bit. All right, for this part, it's a very like loose bend, so it shouldn't take a lot of pressure. You might not even need to like make the wood wet, but just for a demonstration. Usually you don't even need to use this spring steel because it's such a very wide radius. I just kind of move along the length of it. If I need to, let's say this dries and it's not quite how I want it to be, it's pretty easy to fix any bends or readdress any if need be. I might not even use moisture on that. I would just use it, kind of dry bend it. It just depends on where the bend is and where you need the flex to be. Almost there. All right. So without the mold, you can see holds its form pretty well as is, but fits in really well like that. So I like leaving this tail here because I can actually bend it and it'll form the treble side, the back half of the treble side, and I'll loop it up on the inside. So if you have lumber that you can mill to this length and have this extra tail, it's going to save you a step from bending this curve as a separate piece. So what I'm going to now do is I'll just kind of reinforce the bends by kind of heating them up. And then it also gets any extra moisture out. Again, it's not a lot of water used, as you can see. It's just the spray bottle. But I like to sandwich it. And always remember when you're done bending to turn off the thing you were bending on. One time I forgot, I left this on. Been like an hour, and then I was trying to reach over it to get something, and I put my hand down on it to use it to push off and reach, and then it like burned my hand shut for like 2 weeks, and it was not fantastic at all. So I'm actually working a bend into the maybe I'm pressing my luck. I don't know. But I'm going to eventually build the rim in this. It's just plywood. And I don't know, I've been using this for like a decade. And what I'll do is I'll fit this in eventually into here, so you can see where this tail just needs to bend up a little more, and then it's going to tuck into the side and glue, and it'll be a nice and seamless for this middle part, which is cool. So I'm going to see, let's see if I can get that. No big deal if you can't. I mean, it just saves a step, but while we're at it, so that should work in here. So you can see that tail now fits right up in here, and then it'll be glued to the inside of this piece. So that's pretty good for the first session of bending. I'll clamp this in. It doesn't really need it, but it's a good habit to just make sure it sets okay. And then I'm gonna work on these other pieces. But that's basically the process I use for bending mandolin sides or small body instruments. So I'm gonna keep on working on this while the heating iron is nice and hot.